Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Stocker, and I'm the Chief Executive of the National Sheep Association. I'm really pleased to be chairing this webinar this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Just a few housekeeping points before we get going. This webinar is being recorded and it will be circulated within 24 hours. So all the email contacts that we've got will receive this recording of the webinar, and it will be available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website as well. This is actually the fifth technical webinar that is providing an update on Bluetongue in England. There will, on an ongoing basis in the future now, there'll be one every alternate Wednesday. Please to stay in touch with progress and the way that things are developing, if you can register for them via the AHDB website. It is a series of ongoing webinars just to keep people updated with what can be a rapidly developing process. This evening we're going to hear from the main speaker. The main speaker is Jose Biss, who is the veterinary head of field delivery within the Animal Plant and Health Agency. So we'll come to Jose in a moment, and we'll have plenty of opportunity to answer your questions as well. Any questions that we can't deal with will be dealt with afterwards, and there'll be the questions and answers will be placed on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. So we've only got one speaker this evening, but it should allow us plenty of time for questions, and we've got up to an hour and a half if we need it, but we're not expecting that this evening's webinar is going to need to go on that long. We've also got another really good number of attendees as well, so bear with us in terms of going through any questions and answers. If you can put your questions in the chat throughout, and I'll pick them up and answer them as we go through. And at the end of the webinar as well, there will be a feedback form that appears on your screen, and if you can fill that in, that will give us some guidance in terms of future webinar topics in relation to Bluetongue. So thank you. If we can skip on to the next slide, please. This shows you how to pose those questions. So if you can follow those directions, that'd be great. Thank you. So just as a very brief introduction from me, you know, although we're in the unfortunate situation of having a Bluetongue virus series 3 outbreak here in the UK, and it's certainly created some difficulties for farmers. We've also got some real concerns going forward as well. You know, it's unfortunate we're in this situation, and I guess our main concern is what happens later in the year. But there is some good news on the immediate horizon, I guess, in that we are in a low vector period, and as a result of that, really, Defra have removed the temporary control zones on Monday earlier this week. So that's changed the way that we can move livestock around the country, and that's going to be the main focus of this evening's presentation from Jose. Jose is going to give a bit of a background to the situation and also an update on the current situation before he moves on to give us an update on the current movement controls after the lifting of those temporary control zones in Norfolk and in Kent. We then got plenty of time for questions, and then we'll have a wrapping up session at the end of the day as well, end of the evening as well. So without any further ado, I think, Jose, I'll pass over to you and let you go through your slides. Jose.
Thank you, Phil, and good evening, everybody. So I've prepared something to give you like a short snappy update on this BTV3 incursion in GB and what's the current state of play in the next few weeks whilst we are still in this seasonal low vector period. Next slide, please. So first of all, just a reminder of disease control measures and why we're doing what we're doing. So the government's primary short-term objective is to establish that the virus isn't circulating in the midge population and to control any disclosed disease. For that purpose, you know, we aim to have a swift and effective response, try identify and close all risk pathways, and make sure that, you know, we resolve any uncertainties quickly. With that in mind, the actions are or will be as well, to initially declare a 10-kilometer temporary control zone around premises where cases are confirmed. And this may extend based on ongoing surveillance and tracings. The movements of ruminants and susceptible livestock, such as camelids, is restricted within those TCZs unless it's licensed, and there is a derogation that's been put in place to allow the movement of dairy cattle for the purpose of milking without the need of a license. Yeah, needless to say that APHA will undertake an EP investigation for every case that is confirmed to try and identify the likely source of infection and make sure that there aren't any further positive animals in those holdings. So the current hypothesis with the situation that we've experienced is that the virus was introduced by infected midges blown over from the near continent during the months of September and October 2023. And it's worth noting that the Netherlands has had up till now over 5,900 premises confirmed with BTV3, with other cases also confirmed in Germany and Belgium. Next one, please. So currently, yeah, we know there's just a little bit of a recap. So this all came about as a single bovine animal was identified as positive back in November last year during the annual Bluetongue survey program that we run in the risk counties of England. And as of yesterday afternoon, I mean, these figures change rapidly as we progress through surveillance. We had 107 confirmed positive cattle and 6 sheep across 49 separate holdings in 65 different locations. Those are in the counties of Norfolk, Kent and Surrey. And good news is we still have no evidence of Bluetongue virus circulating in Great Britain, even though surveillance continues after the TCZs were lifted back last Monday midday. And it will continue until we've had all the risk animals from the untested holdings tested, as it were. So, as I said, we are in the seasonal low vector period, and this was confirmed to have started through the monitoring of midge activity back in the 18th of January this year. As a result of that, although this is, set in stone, permanently subject to review, as a result of that and the reduced risk of onward transmission of new positive animals, no new positive animals have been culled since that date. So, yeah, just stating again, the temporary control zones in Kent, Norfolk and parts of Suffolk were lifted in on Monday, this last Monday, 19th February at noon. However, positive high-risk animals will remain under restrictions, as will premises where sampling is yet to happen. And APHA has contacted all livestock keepers in the zone to inform them of what that means for them. This is just a quick visual of what the zones, most of you will be familiar what the zones look like that are no longer in place, but as I said, surveillance of susceptible holdings with susceptible risk animals continues until we've captured all of them. And I hasten to add, the tracings of any animals from any of those positive holdings identified is also underway. Next one, please. So surveillance is ongoing. As I said, there's only a handful of premises. I'm told approximately 32 holdings left to visit, with probably something just above 4,800 animals left to sample. And with everything planned, the expectation is that we will have completed all of that surveillance by early March. And as I said, between the lifting of TCZ last Monday and the full completion, all untested premises will remain under restrictions. That's it. Thank you. So what does that mean in terms of controls of susceptible livestock? Yep, we said TCZ is lifted, therefore, the zone restrictions no longer apply. However, there are specific holdings which either remain under restrictions or were placed under restrictions at just before the TCZs were lifted. And these include holdings with positive animals, holdings where surveillance is still pending, as I said, and holdings where animals have landed from infected holdings and are pending testing. So holdings where positive animals were disclosed and those animals still remain on the holding, but where all the other animals have been tested, so all testing has been completed with negative results, except for those positive ones identified, have been issued with a specific license for multiple use that allows movements of Bluetongue susceptible animals that were negative and also of Bluetongue positive animals that are considered of low risk. And that would be fundamentally non-breeding animals that or breeding animals that have been certified as non-pregnant or castrated males. Next one, please. So for holdings which are restricted due to animals pending surveillance testing, they will be tested between now, as I said, and early March, and their restrictions should come off once the testing of all the risk animals has been undertaken with negative results. Of course, any positive risk animals may result in them continuing to be under restrictions initially, and therefore a license for a specific movement of animals may be issued to them. In the meantime, and whilst these visits and tests are underway, there continues to be specific licenses available for movements of susceptible animals. And these can be applied for through gov.uk as usual. Please give us 5 working days notice to be able to process those applications and make sure that those applications can be assessed. And just to reiterate that not all applications will result in a license being issued, as they are all subject to a veterinary risk assessment. So what kind of licenses are available currently? So we've got licenses from Bluetongue restricted holdings to direct to designated slaughterhouses, as we've been having. There's also licenses available for movements between unrestricted holdings onto restricted premises, and that includes movements of animals from markets onto restricted Bluetongue holdings or Bluetongue restricted holdings. We've got another one for movements of animals between Bluetongue restricted holdings. And finally, there is one as well to allow, by exceptional circumstances, movement of animals from, and that would be untested risk animals, from Bluetongue restricted holdings to live elsewhere. And that, by definition, would be an unrestricted holding. This would be only in the case of urgent welfare concerns, and it would be subject to conditions. The three main salient conditions I've put down there, which is those movements wouldn't be allowed beyond 10 miles. The requirements would be that the holding of destination would be put under restrictions, and then there would be a requirement for a post-movement testing of those animals that have moved. And the next one, please. So in the horizon, there's also, even though we're talking about very short periods of time, there's also in scope the possibility of a license to move animals from restricted holdings to non-restricted premises, including markets. However, that is still not available and would be subject to testing by PCR and serology of any such animals that might be subject to the license, with negative results, of course. And so just to give a bit more clarity on that, samples that are collected by APHA in the course of our surveillance ongoing work that can be used for the purpose of these license moves. However, if that's outside APHA visits for surveillance, then it is down to the keeper to organise and bear the cost of the collection of the samples. However, in all cases, APHA will bear the costs of the tests. And I think that's all I have to give you. Just a reminder that, yep, please continue, even though we are in the low season, the seasonal low vector period. We need to maintain vigilance, and we haven't had or seen clinical signs of disease thus far in GB. But as things change and we move into perhaps higher temperatures, we need to remain vigilant for any signs of disease. I think it's fair to say that the actions that APHA has taken are there to try and mitigate the possibility of the overwintering of disease, and therefore I think the risks of animals remaining that would result in in disease emerging as a result of this incursion is probably well mitigated. And thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Jose. Anna, would you just like to show quickly the flow chart that has been produced over the last couple of days? Following some of those movement controls is quite difficult, so Ruminant Health and Welfare have got together and produced this flow chart. I don't propose to go through it now, but it does show it. It will be available. It is available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website, so do go and take a look at this. But it does show you, gives you a flow chart really as to when you require a license to move animals. Obviously the restricted boxes are in those orange colors, and the freedom to move is covered in the yellow, in the green areas. But as I say, I'm not going to go through all that now because Jose has explained a lot of this, but this does give you a practical way to try to work through when you can move and the movement controls. So I'm going to go now to a few questions. We've got some good questions that have come in. The first one is an overarching question, Jose, and I know we haven't got I'm sure we haven't got the answer to this, but it's a question about how much this is all cost. You know, how much is all the testing cost? This includes staff who are out testing, car hires, hotels, and then the lab testing and the communications. And I'm sure we don't know this. I'm sure there will be a figure that's produced at some stage, because we do need to track the cost of these diseases. But I guess from my perspective, it shows the importance of controlling these diseases, and how Defra and the government are prepared to invest in trying to really restrict or contain diseases and maintain our disease-free status. It's really important for productivity. It's really important for our markets and trade and the welfare of animals. And it's another really sobering lesson, I guess, in terms of the importance of our high disease health status, and the fact that we are prepared to invest money to keep us as clean as we can be in terms of disease. Jose, is there anything you'd like to add to that? I'm sure this figure will come out in due course, but Jose?
Yeah, no, I don't have the figure, Phil, of course, and I'm sure it's run into the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds of cost of the exercise. However, you know, we have to be reminded about the costs of disease to the industry. And if we look at what's been going on in the Netherlands over the last few months, you know, I think the figures speak by themselves in terms of cost. So it's you know, it's an investment to make sure that we're protecting industry, really.
Absolutely.
And trade.
Absolutely right. Okay, moving on to some more questions. Is there any news on a vaccine for BTV3? Now, again, you know, we've talked about this on a fairly regular basis. I think the general feeling is that there's very unlikely to be a vaccine that's available until 2025, and no one quite knows if it will be available or when in 2025 it might become available. There's certainly a lot of interest in a vaccine in Holland and Belgium and Germany, and you know, the UK is working with those and is in contact with those nations, I guess, because if a vaccine was available, it wouldn't just be for any of those countries. So collaboration is going to be really, really important. And also important to mention to people that are on the call that we are planning a podcast to be produced on the latest on vaccines that probably will be produced in the next couple of weeks. So again, that too will be promoted on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. So there should be more information become available over this next couple of weeks. But again, Jose, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
No, not really. I haven't got any further updates with regards to vaccine development, but I do know that it's something that's you know, it's being pursued. I guess, you know, these remains something also of a commercial enterprise, because you know, pharmaceutical companies will develop what you want if the money's right. So if there's an interest commercially, then for sure this will be developed, but it will take its time.
And going back to where we started as well, you know, there is real nervousness, really serious nervousness about what we face as we go through the rest of 2024 and get into a higher vector period. And you know, I guess some of that will depend on whether there's a reservoir of disease that is here that does start to circulate. That certainly doesn't. There's no evidence that that is the case at the moment, or whether we get another wave of infected midges coming across from Holland to create a new infectivity. But it does look like we've got the rest of this year to go through with no vaccine and very little that we can do to protect ourselves. So it's going to be a nervous period.
It will be. I think it's clear that you know, we're all nervous about what will happen when you know, temperatures rise and you know, midge activity increases. But I think we can be fairly confident that you know, the actions that we've taken will result in very low risk of us having left anything that you know, could harbour infection and re-emerge. But of course, as you said, you know, this, you know, as I said before, the hypothesis that is that this has come through the nearby continent areas through plumes of midges, and so could happen again for sure.
Jose, I don't know if you can help with this one as well. If a vaccine were available in the future, what controls would be applied between vaccinated and unvaccinated areas? And I guess how would this affect our trade as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. I don't know, but I mean, I see if we had an approved effective BTV3 serotype vaccine, I would have thought that similar actions as were taken back in 2007 when BTV8 incursions occurred and vaccination was encouraged, I would say. So I would expect that something similar would take place.
Okay, moving on to a slightly different subject. This is from Anne Ratcliffe. Most of the animals affected have been cows. There is some 110 or 115, 110 cattle, I think, and some 6 sheep. So it's predominantly been cattle that have been affected. Why haven't more sheep been affected? Again, Jose, we've got some answers to that, I think, but Jose, would you like to pick that one up? I think you might have frozen, actually, which is somewhat inconvenient. But really, the view on that, Anne, is that the cattle are probably bigger targets. And if there's a small number of infected midges that are around, they're probably going to go for those bigger targets. And at this time of year as well, most of our sheep are very heavily wooled, covered with wool, and they're probably more difficult to bite as well. So yep, that does seem to be the reason why this is popping up more in cattle than sheep. Jose?
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Phil, because I think I froze and I lost part of what you were saying. I think it was something around the why cattle had been more, that we certainly found more positive cattle than sheep, and the reasons for that. And I think, yeah, wool coverage is one of the things that mitigates the risk for that. I think what we've seen in the Netherlands, the experience they've had there is that the effects on sheep, however, clinically has been, and the losses in sheep have been much worse than in cattle. But really, yeah, why more cattle? Why have we disclosed more cattle than sheep? Not really sure why that's been the case. Could it be about the numbers in the area?
Yeah, I mean, there are more cattle in these areas probably than sheep as well. But again, there's no shortage of sheep either in North Norfolk or Kent. So I mean, it's also really important to point out that at the moment, all these positive cases have been identified on surveillance and blood testing, and to date, there's been no clinical signs that have been observed because
absolutely, yeah,
level of infectivity really. But okay, what is the exit strategy for positive animals that are remaining alive? We got to that point a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, where we stopped positive animals. So what is the exit strategy for those positive animals that are remaining alive?
So I think there are several possible exit strategies for those animals. I think the main concerning animals are pregnant positive females, and by virtue of being able to transmit, the vertical transmission to offspring, and the entire males, and the possibility that they remain infected. Infection is in the testes. So those are the two categories where I don't think I'm really in a position now to say what would be the ultimate exit strategy with those type of animals. Certainly, the testing of any offspring that drops from a positive female would be required, I would have thought. And not entirely sure where we sit with what happens with those entire males that have been positive, if they remain entire, that is. And I think with regards to other animals, then again, there shouldn't, there should be a point from which decision can be made about whether those animals, those restrictions can come off. But yeah, I don't have here full details of what the exit strategies would entail for each different type of holding and type of animal. Positive animal.
To get back to that subject of the majority of these positive cases being cattle and fewer being sheep, there's been a recent trip over to Holland. The NFU organised a few people to go over, and we've also had some feedback a couple of months ago from veterinary bodies and farmers in Holland as well. There's a question here from Les Eckford asking what effects. I suppose it's really what we can learn from the Netherlands situation. What have the effects been on goats? Maybe that have got less cover on their bodies and thinner skin. And I guess they're quite often animals in the Netherlands would be kept, managed, housed in very different ways than they are here in the UK as well. So are we aware? More lessons will emerge, I'm sure, but are we aware of any other learnings that we can get from Holland in terms of where the disease has been seen and that the goat situation as well?
I'm not aware of the disease in goats in the Netherlands. I've looked at some of the information that's been coming from the Netherlands, and goats aren't something I've been able to pick on. I think a lot of the losses that I've seen in cattle in particular has been around dairy herds. So again, perhaps different type of herds, and well, particularly the dairy industry, where milk drops have been noticed in the Netherlands. I would have thought that yes. I mean, but the difference in production systems would be quite different from Netherlands to the UK. Not really sure that. I mean, the lessons that we obviously can get is that the effects that they've had seem to have been significant in terms of losses in production and the impact in the industry. So they have, and how the disease seemed to have spread there with clinical signs quite rapidly. So they did have a fairly quick expansion of what is a vector-borne disease. But does that mean that it's down to geography and perhaps density of cattle in the areas, and other livestock possibly?
And staying with the subject of lessons learned from the Netherlands as well, there's a question here about how sheep may be cared for, and I guess this is all livestock. How do we care for livestock if they're infected with Bluetongue? Now, I guess that's we're talking there about showing clinical symptoms really, but I know that, again, there's some work going on at the moment with some sheep vets, and the aim is to produce some guidance on what people might do to protect the welfare or alleviate some of the pain or suffering of infected animals. So that information will come out. But is there anything you'd like to say there, Jose?
Well, I mean, yeah, maintaining animal welfare, during notifold disease or non-notifold disease is paramount. So, we have to, alleviate suffering where suffering is present. I think my understanding is that, sheep in the Netherlands were really badly affected, and there was a significant number of deaths occurring on these flocks. So the question is, how do we obviously we've got restrictions in place, etc. Once disease is confirmed, but that does not detract from the fact that we need to continue to provide animal welfare assistance to animals that are that are suffering, and take whatever decisions are needed in order to alleviate that suffering.
And hopefully now we're in a relatively quiet period, there should be information produced in terms of guidance on what can be done by the time, if we get to that point, by the time that we start to see clinical signs of any disease later in the year, hopefully.
That's a good point, actually. We do need to get clarity about what sort of interventions would be, because of course disease control and spread of disease, or risk of spread of disease, is a key element here. But we can't. There's got to be mechanisms by which animal welfare can be maintained, and it might be that there will be other interventions depending on the severity of clinical signs that we observe. If touch wood, we won't see these sort of things, but in a sort of a epidemic where we had a proper outbreak, so then that might change completely the way in which we deal with things. Yeah.
There's a question here about where we go next. The question is, will surveillance be enhanced when the vector low activity period ends?
So my understanding is we have, I don't know is a straight answer, a straight short answer, but we do have these annual surveys, and they come on during the high activity vector period, and that's how we picked up the initial positives, and that's how we identified that BTV3 infection was in the country. So those will continue, as they have been in place for some years. I'm not aware that there are plans, once the current surveillance is completed, that we will do any particular new surveillance. I know that there's been some enhancement to the end of high vector period survey, with further farms recruited in the risk areas of incursion, and that is also currently being completed. But I think there hasn't been anything majorly disclosed on those. So I'm not aware that there will be anything further beyond the current ongoing survey. Yeah.
And this comes back to the point that you made in one of your slides, doesn't it, Jose? That I think that everyone being vigilant and reporting to their vet any suspected cases is going to be really crucial.
Absolutely. We've had a significant number, I think 70 investigations undertaken in England, with a number as well in Wales. And not all of them have been as a result of any positives disclosed through surveillance, but actually through active reporting of clinical signs that couldn't be, that were in the differential for Bluetongue virus, and therefore, that is resource intensive, but that's exactly what we need. So we need reports, and we need people not to turn a blind eye on things that may well be, and I think there were comments about in previous webinars. I remember conversations around Schmallenberg virus and other diseases that could produce similar clinical signs, particularly about, I think we were talking about abortions and other situations. But yeah, any clinical sign where Bluetongue would be differential needs to be reported. Yeah.
Just a general point here as well, because as I said right at the beginning, the situation has been changing quite rapidly on an ongoing basis, and I think it's really important for people to stay in touch with these webinars keep an eye on the Ruminant Health and Welfare and gov.uk websites just for updates, because things do change and information will be being updated. And the flowchart that is in front of you as well. Again, this is a living document, if you like. So as things develop and change and alter, they will be refreshed on the website. So I think we'd advise you not to print them off and circulate them, because you know, they will be changed online, and that's where you'll get the most up-to-date information. Jose, to go back to the beginning as well, there's a question here about what is the most likely date of introduction of BTV3 in the UK, and has EPI determined this?
I'm sure we do have that, but I can't volunteer the the answer here.
Yeah.
I can certainly take that away and talk to EPI colleagues that will, you know, would be happy to provide a likely introduction date.
Okay. Yeah. And we can put that question on the website and an answer alongside that as well. So we'll pick that up at a later stage. The question around culling as well. What was achieved by the culling of the animals that we did? What was the purpose of the culling policy?
So the culling was in place initially, whilst, and this was the initial stages where we hadn't carried out, you know, we were early stages of surveillance, and whilst we were having abnormally high temperatures, which meant that the vector activity was higher than we would perhaps have expected for the time of year. In fact, as I said, you know, this was determined as low vector season, low activity vector season only sort of mid-January, which is unusually late for the time of year. So the purpose of culling initial positive animals was to try and contain the spread of disease in view that, you know, midge activity was still fairly high.
Great. I mean, it's also important to point out, you know, you're a vet, I'm a layperson within this, but it's really important to point out that surveillance has been both testing for infectivity and for antibodies as well, isn't it? So
yes, it has. Yeah,
it's an indication of whether there's been infection around for some time or whether those animals are still infective.
Yes, I mean that it's difficult to answer that, but of course we've done PCRs on these animals, and so they've been, you know, there's a potential for viremia still present.
Yeah. So a question on PCR testing and movements: can a PCR negative and antibody positive animal be moved?
I'm not sure that we've had any of this, possibly. I think I wouldn't want to say now, but I would think that yes, that's probably a less risky animal. So an animal that's PCR negative but serology positive may indicate that there's, you know, there's been a recovery from infection, and therefore, you know, it is unlikely to transmit virus. And at this stage, as I said, the fact that we are in the low vector period means that even, you know, these positive animals, you know, are less of a risk. And as time goes by, we know that, you know, the longer this period goes by, the less infective these animals can be, even if they are positive now.
And I suspect that that will be information that, again, will emerge over this next week or two, and it will be updated on these websites again. And given that we're, for the immediate future, we're not likely to move back into general surveillance. We just won't pick these animals up, will we? There'll be an assumption that any animal that's got antibodies but is infected quite some time ago will not be a risk.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it's hard to say what will happen because we haven't completed the surveillance yet, and of course, you know, as you said, things are quite dynamic and may change depending on the picture that we identify. All things being equal, so in terms of what, you know, the sort of disclosures that we've had up until now, where we don't think that virus is circulating, I think, we'll see these come to an end, and complete surveillance. What will happen after that will depend very much on any developments.
A question on testing and tracing as well. Have you traced and tested animals that are on land that was in the temporary control zone, but their holding was outside the zone? These animals have not been tested. Also, what about sheep as pets with no flock number or holding number? So this is
sorry, I'm not sure. So we're talking about animals that have been moved from outside the TCZ into the. Is that the question? Sorry.
So we're talking here about animals that were grazing potentially on land that was within the temporary control zone, but the actual holding was outside of the zone. So they would have been.
So well, I mean, there has been from the beginning a aim to try and identify all temporary land parcels and make sure that we were capturing everybody's livestock susceptible livestock within the temporary control zones. It makes it really difficult when people aren't necessarily registering parcels of land, and we find out that there are people renting bits of land without that being associated. I think it's really important that farmers realize, it's the basic principle of traceability for disease control. So we do need to make sure that people register with their holding any parcels of land that they're renting. I mean, without that information, of course, we might miss any animals that would have been in there during the risk period, and that therefore would rightly need to be tested. So is there a risk? Yes, there is a risk, but I think we have pretty much reconciled all parcels of land, and we've identified through intelligence the presence of animals even moving across different holdings with movements that perhaps hadn't been properly reported. I think that it is really important. It's at the heart of disease control is traceability and movement controls. Yeah.
And there have been cases, haven't there, where through the tracing process, animals have been tested on holdings that are outside the TCZs, but were during the autumn.
I believe so. I believe that some have been, yes, yeah. But I wouldn't be able to confirm completely that. Yeah.
And that takes us on to that other part of that question as well, which was what about sheep that may be being kept as pets with no flock or holding number? And all sheep should be registered with Defra.
Absolutely.
All flock number. And
there is no exception. There's no such thing as a pet sheep. Well, there is a pet sheep, but it's a farmed animal under the law, and it's required to have a identification and being a registered holding. Again,
absolutely.
Down to
there are no
keepers.
There's rules on it. There are no sheep that are exempt.
It's just about people following rules, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, let me just check whether there's any further questions. That there's a question here specific to midges. Actually, is it true that the Scottish midge cannot spread Bluetongue, as it is different from the European midge? Jose, have you frozen again? I think we may have lost Jose for a second or two. I think we have lost Jose. We've got two questions that that are remaining. One is about the midge, which I'm sure we can answer online. And I think we've, and there was another question that I've not ticked off here, which is about achieving what we achieved through the culling of the animals that has taken place, and we have dealt with that one as well. So I think we've certainly come to the end of our questions. It looks like we've lost Jose as well. So just a couple of final points before we close in that case. There is a really valuable Bluetongue resource hub on the AHDB website. The web address is there. There's also a BTV hotline. Again, these slides I think will be available on the ruminant and the AHDB and the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. So there's a BTV hotline that people can phone if they want to, if they haven't got access to the internet, maybe. And then finally, I think, please complete the feedback form that will appear on the screen at the end of the webinar. I think that brings us to the end. There's also an information leaflet there again on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website, a really valuable resource there. So do keep an eye on it. As I said earlier, you know, things are changing and do change quite rapidly, and the most up-to-date information will be the information that's online. So do make use of that website if you can. So I think probably a final bit of information about additional support. We know that this is a disease that can cause real problems with animal welfare, but also with farmer welfare as well. It can be a stressful situation to be. So there's contacts there for a range of organisations that can provide support if people are struggling. So again, you know, do make use of these organisations. Jose, you've come back again, which is great. And we were just asking the final question. I don't actually know the answer to this, but the question was about the Scottish midge and whether the Scottish midge cannot spread Bluetongue virus because it's different from the European midge. Do you know the answer to that? I think we've lost Jose again. How unfortunate this is. But listen, I think we ought to bring this to an end. But I'd just like to thank everyone for taking part this evening, or for joining us this evening. I hope you've got a lot from it. And as I say, the best advice really is twofold. One is to keep your eye on these websites, and secondly, it is to keep an eye on the fortnightly Wednesday early evening webinars that are taking place. Look at the subjects that are coming up, and please register for them, and join to keep up to date with how things are developing. And with that, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us this evening, and to thank Jose for presenting and sharing his knowledge of the situation with us as well. So thank you and good evening.